Hi, this is Ian Wright, and just doing a little, very short kind of self-care introduction. I'm going to do 4 or 5 of these, just to, well, I suppose hopefully be helpful in some way in general. So this series is really, it's about steps that we can take, very simple steps that we can take. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is pretty straightforward, pretty obvious. But it's nice to kind of just get a reminder sometimes, of these little things that we can do. Because actually, it's interesting, isn't it, that often, say if we're mothering or busy people, the last person we care for is ourselves. And by taking some simple steps in self-care, we can actually stop ourselves from becoming unwell. And that's the purpose of this kind of discussion, really. So today is about emotion. I think I'm going to do one on nutrition, exercise, sleep, and a couple more than that, I think. But this one will be on emotion. Emotion is interesting, isn't it? Because we tend to be somewhat frightened of emotion. We either push it away or we kind of indulge ourselves in it. And if you think of emotion as energy, which is in motion, emotion, it has to move. And the problem, I think, often with emotions is they can get stuck. And if they get stuck, they can start to physiologically affect us. And I'm going to talk about 3 basic emotions, really. The 3 biggies are fear, anger, and grief. I mean, there are others, obviously guilt, shame, and compound emotions like rage, frustration, depression, etc. But fear, anger, and grief are probably the 3 biggest ones that we tend to feel. But the process with them, and I'll talk about each of the 3 in turn because they all have different elements and can affect different parts of us. But the basic premise of working with emotions is allowing ourselves to feel them. First of all, accepting that we actually have them and that we're allowed to have those emotions and to feel this. Because often we don't allow ourselves to feel an emotion within the moment and we push it away. It comes back and grabs us. If you have, for example, anger, if it gets vented inwards, it can be quite inflammatory, but even physiologically inflammatory, and that kind of rage that gets locked inside can not be very healthy with the body, and so it has to move. And I'll talk about anger first. So the first thing is we have to accept that we have these feelings. So some of us find it very hard to actually allow ourselves to feel anger. Sometimes when we feel anger, we're frightened of actually, if we really let ourselves feel that emotion, of going crazy with it because it's so strong. So there's a lot of people I come to terms with who are saying, well, no, I if I actually allow myself to feel that a level of rage, it would be, terrifying. And I say, but it's all of that is inside you. It's inside you. So it has to come out because otherwise it's going to create trouble. And this is really what we're here for, is to stop trouble before it starts. So there is an actual at the end I'll do a practice, a very clear practice on working directly with emotions because they tend to be layered. For example, talking about anger. Anger has emotion to it. It has actually, normally if we get angry about something, it means we act. So it actually has a positive element to anger. Anger makes us act and get on with things and change something because we're not happy with it. Anger can lodge in places like the liver. The liver can be angry. The immune system reacts to anger with inflammatory responses. The spleen venting our spleen. These are the kind of areas that can be physiologically affected by anger. And interestingly, with anger, underneath anger, there tends to be another emotion quite closely sitting underneath it. And it is often either fear or grief that actually has that. But anger, it actually is the motile power. It's the power that can shift some of these things. And it's not a bad thing to have. And so as it comes down to all this, we start with allowing ourselves to feel the emotion. So actually, to actually say, I'm feeling angry, is a hugely powerful thing. What we tend to do is have a go at someone, get angry, to say, you've done this, you've done that. Now, I love the kind of the essence of non-violent communication, which is saying, actually, I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling angry. Not you've done this, more this is how I'm feeling. And the interesting thing in that, and the beautiful thing in that is by acknowledging that you feel that to someone, if you actually have to, they want to change it. They want to support you. But if you start having a go at them and telling them how awful they are, they're going to react. But actually saying, I'm feeling really upset, they'll go, oh, really? Why? And start to engage. It's an engaging, opening process as opposed to a closing down process. So, anger. Allow yourself to feel it. Wow, how can you, to actually feel it in that moment when, say, something upsets you, it's hard to do, isn't it? Often it can be reflective, and some people are more reflective and some people are more reactive in their direct responses. And actually, interestingly enough, the people who are more directly reactive tend to not be so deeply affected by it. They'll get angry and it's gone. It's literally gone. It comes and goes. And it's almost more healthy that way, as long as they don't murder everyone around, So that's anger. And when anger gets turned inwards on ourselves, it can become quite destructive to our psyches, but also to our physiology. So the first thing is to have an awareness if you are feeling angry or if something is upsetting you, to allow yourself to actually acknowledge that you feel that. And so a lot of our dealing with emotions is actually sitting yourself down going, what am I feeling here? Just give yourself a minute and say, what am I feeling here? I'm really angry about this situation, this lockdown, this situation, this whatever, all these different things. And just let yourself feel that feeling. That really say, that's okay. I feel that. And if you actually allow yourself to feel, really strongly feel that emotion in that moment, what happens? By actually allowing yourself to feel it, it starts to transmutate. Emotions have to be transmutated, have to be changed. And as soon as you put in an allowing, or you allow that emotion, it starts to breathe, it starts to soften, it starts to calm, it starts to relax. And actually, then what's below it? What's below that? Okay, there's another emotion here. Maybe that's fear. Maybe I'm really frightened for the future, or fine. Yeah, there's an anxiety. There's a fear pattern that lies maybe underneath some of that anger. And so, again, with fear, what do? We allow ourselves to feel it. Fear tends to go to the lungs. It can go to the kidneys. Is often a place where you get gripped with fear. The HPA axis, the amygdala, all that stuff I talk about with anxiety. It can lock into those areas and cause us some grief. And fear can be debilitating. But the interesting thing again is actually, what about if you fully allow yourself to feel that fear? If you actually feel that fear, give yourself the opportunity to allow yourself to feel that fear. And what happens? Again, it starts to soften, it starts to breathe, and it doesn't actually necessarily feel completely debilitating. If you have chronic anxiety, that's slightly different to what I'm dealing with here. I'm just talking about general emotions here. So, anxiety is a whole other thing, and I've got tons of stuff on that as well, because that's a very debilitative process and it needs to be worked out on a much deeper level. This is just allowing yourself to feel the emotion in the moment. So you allow yourself to feel that. Now, Grief is a huge one. Grief, like for example, if you lose a member of your family, a partner or a parent or whatever, grief, in my view, has to be transmutated through every cell in the body. It's something you can feel in every cell in the body. It goes to particular areas, the heart, the lungs, etc., the shoulders. Someone who's lost someone tends to, after about 2 years, tends to start getting a frozen shoulder as a manifestation later. It's a physical manifestation of an emotional pattern. But grief has to be processed through every cell in the body. I do a lot of work with people in grief, and it's really important because it can get stuck, especially if it starts with shock. If someone suddenly passes or there is shock around that process, you can get stuck in the shock stage. And if you get stuck in the shock stage, you just don't get anywhere and you can't process it. And so you have to go through this process of releasing the shock so that you can actually start to transmutate. You have to be embodied and in your body in order for it to transmutate. And actually that process is, again, it's about allowing yourself to feel it, fully allowing yourself to feel that sadness. And when you start to fully allow yourself to feel it, it starts to breathe, it starts to soften. And that is a process of transmutation. I remember spending some time 25 years ago, maybe, in a Mayan village where I lived there for 6 months in Guatemala. And there was a huge, because there'd been lots of trouble there previously, and I was working with some of the indigenous tribes there and treating them, and because there was a lot of trauma that had been put through them. And one of the things these Mayans did is if they lost someone, they would absolutely yell, scream, and cry for 24 hours. It was intense, emotional, but then after that, they came around a little bit quicker. Now, I'm not saying that's what we should do, because actually I think grief has its process in time, and it takes a couple of years to process through until you come to some sort of resolution and peace, and that is normal. And there's no easy way around it. And it's obviously, if it's a child, it's a whole different story, much longer, never, but all of that needs to be a process. It needs to have a fluency and a momentum, and so that it can be transmutated and processed through each cell in the body. So what I'm saying here really is, and there are other emotions that can be quite debilitative, like guilt and shame. Those are really physiologically difficult ones to do. They really get lodged in the body and can make us feel really, well, it really can affect, put a real cloud on the way we perceive ourselves within the world. Again, the process is to fully allow yourself to feel that feeling, that emotion. And if you do that, and as you do that, it can transmutate. And so on the converse to this is you have joy, you have bliss, and these can act to really regulate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. They really allow a regulational process. So actually fully allowing ourselves on the other side to feel joy in those moments, or bliss in those moments, is huge as well. So sometimes we don't allow ourselves to feel the upset, but also we don't fully allow ourselves to feel the joy of the moment. And I think one of the great things about time now is that there are certain things like seeing family that we appreciate, we took for granted, and actually this this incredible joy in seeing people, and just allowing ourselves to actually feel those emotions, because the amount of emotions here right now that are brought around by what's been happening this year are huge, in terms of grief, loss, fear, anger. They're huge, and we can't let these emotions get stuck in us, and we have to practice emotional self-care, which is actually simply It's allowing yourself to feel the emotion, sitting with it, allowing with it, not wallowing in it. Because actually, if you fully allow yourself to feel that emotion for a minute, actually even 30 seconds, just allowing it, it starts to shift, and it doesn't get stuck anymore. It's when we push it away, it sits on the edge of our consciousness, and that is much harder to deal with. And the process is if we fully sit and allow ourselves to feel whatever emotion it is, say it's anger, and say we are angry about a particular person or with a particular person, if we allow ourselves to feel that emotion for ourselves, feel that rage, feel that, then we may choose after that to act. And if we act, we can do it in a non-violent way because we've allowed ourselves to feel that feeling. And then we may want to write to them or say or speak to them and say, actually, I'm feeling really upset. Or we may not, because it may be enough just to feel that emotion, really. So just spend a couple of minutes every day doing this, using this energy in motion. So you sit yourself down, allow yourself to come to a bit of quiet, a little bit of neutral, soften your breathing, allow your mind to soften your breathing just a little bit, and then see what comes up. Because emotion is just under the surface and we're far too busy and we're running around. As soon as we just settle down into ourselves, come into our body, then there's the emotion and you'll feel it. And so act on it. Use the emotion to shift yourself. So you can use that energy in motion to actually bring you more peace. So you go, okay, fine. Let's see, first level. Okay, I'm feeling some anger. So you allow yourself feel it. Allow. 30, 40 seconds. It tends to soften away. And maybe it's replaced by something. Maybe there's some sadness, some grief underneath it, or some fear, or some other compound emotion. Allow. And just spend a couple of minutes actively practicing transmutating your emotions. Can be hugely helpful, no matter what the emotion is. But you may, within that process, go, actually, this is a difficult emotion and this is debilitating me, and just that degree of self-awareness means, okay, I need to get some help. I need to talk to someone about this. I'm not being able to process this enough. But often you just have to really allow yourself to process these emotions so they don't build like a glass getting too full. And then when it gets too full of that and all that emotion, it starts to spill out and you start being reactive and irritable and having a go at people you don't even know, and all that kind of thing. Or you can just start to get anxious. Debilitating anxiety can be overwhelming and it's huge. I spend a lot of my time working with it. Anyway, that's really what I wanted to say about that. It's just a very brief introduction. When in my new self-healing course, which is going to come out in, I think, 2 weeks' time, actually. I'm just finishing off. There's about 45 chapters. But I've got specific chapters working with specific emotions, and I go into this much more depth and how to process that kind of stuff, because the emotions, I'm working with emotions is a hugely important part of self-healing, amongst a myriad of other things. So that's part one. Part two, we'll do something on nutrition next week on Monday. Anyway, I wish you well, and tune in for the meditation on Saturday on something. Okay.